Hello everybody, I'm Gwen Campbell-Mindes. Welcome to Gwen's Bookish Ramblings, and we are on the next book in the Chronicles of Narnia, The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, which is, I will be honest with you, one of my favorite, a particular favorite of mine in the series. It's actually kind of an odd book as compared to a lot of the others, because the other books follow a much more traditional path. They follow much more the path of, we are going on an adventure to beat the bad guy, to do a really, really specific thing. When you the adventure is somewhat more directed. In this case, The Voyage of the Dawn Treader is, in its way, very much a travelogue sort of story. At the beginning of this, as compared to the movie that came out in the 2000s that I am so deeply resentful of years later, but we'll let that go, because I'm not supposed to talk about movies here. The thing about this one is that when we first find out the point of this voyage that they're on, that Caspian tells them, well, there are these 7 lords who Miraz basically said, I want you to go away. Sail that way. And so they went and they sailed that way. They just, go east and just keep going east. And so Caspian basically says, I'm going to go and I'm going to sail east for a year and a day and see if I can't find what happened to these guys. And so they do, in the end, find out what happened to these lords. But the thing is that they kind of just... It's not... It isn't something that sort of is there all the time. In the case of Lion the Witch and the Wardrobe, it's all about stopping the White Witch. That even when they're not particularly focused on doing it, she's still there. She's a hovering presence. When you have Prince Caspian, you're going through this whole process because you want to get him crowned king. When, even with the magician's nephew, the whole point of this is Polly and Diggory are trying to figure out how to get out of this mess that Uncle Andrew has basically forced them into. In The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, you're just kind of trundling along. And you just have adventures as you come across them. It owes, I suspect, somewhat to the Odyssey. And as always, of course, the previous cover was the cover of the edition that I read because it is a more recently printed copy and thus stands up better. But this is the Voyage of the Dawn Treader cover that I grew up with, and I happen to think it's a lot better than that incredibly ugly ship. Also, that ship looks more real and doesn't have the incredibly awful-looking sea serpent on it, which, admittedly, while the sea serpent in the book is not described in glowing terms of beauty, it's not, that thing down here, which looks awful, and the ship looks awful, and, what is that off the side, that wing thing? That's terrible. Whereas here you have this cover that actually looks like something. It looks like a book that you'd want to read. So, Voyage of the Dawn Treader opens with Lucy and Edmund because Peter and Susan are now too old to return to Narnia because there is some metaphysical reason why they can't go back as adults. And Lucy and Edmund are having to stay with their cousin Eustace Scrubb. And Eustace's parents are described in a very intriguing way, which is, of course, supposed to make them sound incredibly unpleasant. he didn't call his father and mother, but Harold and Alberta. They were very up-to-date and advanced people. They were vegetarians, non-smokers, and teetotalers, and wore a very special kind of underclothes. In their house there was very little furniture and very few clothes on the beds, and the windows were always open. And, as much as I am loath to spread that particular gimmick about how, vegetarians and vegans and so on and so forth are constantly harassing people, this is designed to evoke the kind of people who really do have that smug, I am a vegetarian, which makes me so fundamentally better than you that I'll sneer down my nose at you. Those people are not in fact endemic, but there are some, as there always are in any group. And Eustace is described as being the child of those kinds of people who maybe they do have some good ideas, but once in a while they could stand to shut up about it. Anyways, Eustace winds up crashing Edmund and Lucy, who are sitting there looking at a painting and talking about how very Narnian the ship is, and does it make it worse to be looking at so very a Narnian ship when we can't actually get to Narnia, or does it make it better? And they wind up somehow getting sucked into the painting, which turns out to be a gateway directly into Narnia, and, and they wind up on Prince Caspian, now King Caspian's ship, and on his voyage to find these 7 lords. And now I'm going to stop talking about the bulk of the book and so on, and move on to my thing about Eustace, because Eustace is given a very, very bad rap during this, and I'm just going to sort of page through the pictures that I took and not actually talk about them, save to say, God, I love these illustrations. Isn't this amazing? It points out the hen coop. It points out there's a hen coop. We knew there was a hen coop because they mentioned it in the book, but it's pointed out in the map of the ship, which is great. Anyways, so Eustace gets a very, very bad rap in this book. Because Eustace is unpleasant. I'm not going to deny that, but he's described as being wholly unreasoningly unpleasant. And the thing is that I think Lucy and Edmund both don't take into account the fact that Eustace has a great many problems with the adjustment that they simply don't have, and that they don't really cotton on to. And the first problem is that Lucy and Edmund both had a very, very gentle introduction to the world of Narnia. When they came in through the through the wardrobe in Lion Witch and the Wardrobe, you get to walk in calmly, you get to make your choice. When you realize it's winter on the other side, they had the opportunity to go back, get coats, be ready to go out into this world where it's winter all of a sudden, and back home in England it's summer. It's a very, very gentle introduction. The whole way through, they know they can turn back at any time. They have that option, and it's, Lucy's able to go in and come back and go in and come back, and the third time they go in, they stay longer, but it's there, and you're able to walk into it calmly and with your eyes open. The second time they go, it's a very much ruder introduction, but they are, they're basically yanked through the time-space continuum off of that train platform, but the difference is that they go back to Narnia, they've had experience with magic, they have a framework for what's happening, a mental framework. With Eustace, his first introduction to the world of Narnia is, one moment I'm in the spare bedroom at home, and the next moment I have been dumped into the equivalent of the Atlantic Ocean. That's not something that is going to lead anyone to be reasonable about this. He has every right to be unreasonable about this. He didn't want to go on an adventure. He didn't ask to go on an adventure. None of this is something that he thinks is a great idea. And in the meantime, his cousins are being lauded as kings and queens. He's in a place with incredibly primitive conditions because it is a medieval type of world as compared to what he is used to, which is 1950s UK. And in the 1950s UK, you have flush toilets. You have, as he mentioned several times, the Queen Mary. You have electric lights and telephones and the British consulate that you can visit if you get lost in a foreign country. And he finds himself in what is not merely a foreign country, but a foreign country where he can't find the British consulate. He can't get somebody to, contact his parents and they will get him on a ship home. He, has no options. He doesn't understand how things work. And there is a giant talking mouse. There is giant talking vermin on this ship. And these people are going around acting like it is normal to have giant talking vermin. Giant talking armed vermin. Because Reepicheep the mouse, who is dynamic and exciting and funny and all kinds of other things, is a giant talking mouse who has a sword. He's a 2-foot tall mouse who has a sword. 2-foot tall vermin with a sword. This is horrifying. And so Eustace is actually quite right in a lot of ways to be very, very unpleasant about things. On top of which, C.S. Lewis makes a very, very good big point when Eustace runs into the dragon and then turns into a dragon, that Eustace hadn't read the, quote, right kinds of books, unquote. Meaning, he had read a lot of non-fiction texts about, granaries and geography and things of that nature. He doesn't know anything about fantasy worlds or dragons or anything else. He has no frame of reference for anything that's happening around him. And his being in denial about no longer being on planet Earth where there is an England, where the Empire, where, the sun never sets on the British Empire, was still a thing in the 1950s. He's got none of that. There's none of that here. And he just doesn't have a frame of reference to cope with anything that's going on. I mean, when Reepicheep goes after him and says, you have committed a grave insult to my person and I demand satisfaction. We're going to have a duel. And Eustace sputters and says, I'm a pacifist. I don't fight. And Reepicheep, rather than respecting the philosophical position, which I grant Eustace isn't going to be the sort that has the kind of introspection that means that he would be a genuine philosophical pacifist who genuinely believes in never raising arms against another person, that he's a pacifist because his parents said he should be. But the fact is that when he says he's a pacifist, Reepicheep's reaction should have been something more respectful than that. Should have been something like, oh, you have taken this philosophical stance. Well, are you hiding behind it, or is this a real thing? And instead he just reacts with a, you poltroon, how dare you? And the problem, and the thing is that it's not that Eustace didn't earn his licks. Picking a person with a tail up and swinging them around over your head and then trying to run away and planning to do that and then run away laughing, it makes you a jerk. And it's not that he isn't a jerk. It's that there are a lot of things that happen in this that in which Eustace is described as being unreasonable, and he really, really isn't. And it's one of the only things that bothers me in this book. I love all of the various stories. I love Eustace's transformation into a dragon and how he goes through that whole thing to eventually reach a realization and inner growth through that particular isolation. I love all of the islands that they visit, all of these strange worlds that they come across. I love the evocative images in this book. There's Lucy walking through the magician's house. I love all of that. But this is my indefensive Eustace Scrubb, who turns into a Pevensey carbon copy by the end. And his mother, Alberta, at the end is quoted as saying that he had become quite tiresome and ordinary. And it's kind of a pity that he never managed to figure out a balance between these two things. Anyways, that's all I'm going to say about this particular book. So that's everything, and I will see you all next week.